Welcome back everyone. In our last video we looked at the width and height properties, and in this video we are going to be looking at the display property. Now, like the name implies, the display property determines how elements on our web page are displayed. Now we have different display property values, but we'll be looking at few of them, and those would be the block, flex, inline block, inline flex, and the display none value. So there are many others, and you can just find time and go through them and look at the results they give you. Now the first one we're going to be looking at is the display none, and as it implies, it will make whatever element that we are adding it to not be displayed on our page. So when we save this file and go back, this entire CSS is cool elements should disappear. So refresh and it's no longer there. So that's it for the display none property value. Now the next one we have is, let's look at the inline. So let's save this and look at the results. Now if you see, before this entire h1 class, this entire h1 element is known as something that is a block level element. Now block level elements are elements that span the entire width of their parents. So setting it now to inline, what that just does is it makes the entire width and height of this element to be set to whatever the content is. So if we increase the text in here, so we go back and let's just copy and paste this a couple more times. You would see that the width increases but does not go past or below that. So that's it. That's what the inline property value does. Now, as we've looked at, the block is the default for this h1 tag. So setting to display block will give us the result as it is without even setting it. So but this is useful with some kind of elements, and later on in this course we could look at such elements. So after that, let's look at the other property values on other elements. Now the most important one that I want to show in this video is the flex box. Now that's using the display flex. So now let's look at this, our container div, and that's okay, this one. So let's unmute this and save, and let's add a display of flex to this div. Now let's go back and refresh this, and so we have this div. Let's reduce our text a bit, and let's remove this set width, and now we have this in full length. And let's look at the height of this. Okay, let's remove this mean height, and let's just clean up this a bit. So well, if we should refresh now, everything looks okay. Now using the display flex, what this does is it aligns the children elements side by side. So let's look at this with display flex and without it. So first of all, let's mute this and go back here and add more children to this div. So we save this and let's refresh, and you can see that the default way, what it just does is the children stack up on each other. But in a situation where we have, let's say we have images, let's say we have 4 images and want to display those 4 images side by side with some text beneath it. Now, how can we do that? That is using the display flex property. So now this was line all the elements side by side. As you can see here, each of them are lined up side by side in a column order. So using this display flex property, we have some options just like flex direction. Now flex direction is what we can use to just define how we want this flex box to work. So we can use the flex direction of column, and what this will give us is the default way it was. And we also have flex direction row, and flex direction row is the default for the flex box, which is stacking them side by side. And we also have the flex direction row reverse. Now to see this in effect, let's remove the text we have in here. And select all this. And let me just close this up. Okay, let's complete these tags. And now let's add a text like, let's say first, then second, third, and fourth. So save this, and when we go back and refresh, you'll see that we have fourth coming first, then third, second, and first. And that's because we set the flex direction to row reverse. And if we just leave it by default, you will see that it's first, second, third, and fourth. Simple. Then, and just with row reverse, we also have column reverse, and this just does the same thing but in the column layout. So we have fourth being first, then third being second, and so on. So now that we've seen that, let's remove this and keep it the default way. So now let's look at another element that can be, another property that can be used with display flex. Now ideally we don't want each of these elements to be side by side completely. Ideally you want to have some gap between each of these elements, and you can achieve that in a flex box using the gap property. Now we can add a gap of 20 pixels, so we have a spacing of 20 pixels between each element. So when I refresh this, you will see that we have spacing of 20 pixels within all these elements. Now that's a useful thing, and it also works in the column layout. So if we set flex direction column, save this and go back, you will see that we also have a gap of 20 pixels between each of these elements. Okay, so another property that we have that we can use between our flex box is the flex property. Now use the flex property with the children of a flex box. So that is all these elements. Now let's add flex and we'll set this to 1. Now refresh. Now what that does is it gives each and every one of the elements in this flex box the same width. So if we add more elements to this flex box, you will see that each of them, okay, let it refresh. You don't forget to save your file, and now you will see that each of them have the same width and it's adjusted with more elements that are added. So we also have auto, so save this, refresh, and it just scales the width automatically, almost the same thing like using one. Then after that, we also have the, okay, let's leave this, we also have the flex wrap property. Now what this does is it allows our elements to be able to wrap. Now what I mean by wrap, now if each of our divs or the children have a set width, if we leave this flex box without adding a wrap, what that will do is when they all get to the end, they will start to either shrink or go off the screen. So we can give an example like this. Let's mute this and let's add a set width to this .text class. So we can add a width of 400 pixels. So if we go back and refresh, okay, let's remove the flex auto. Okay, so if you notice, the div is being shrunk because we don't have a flex wrap. So now if we set a flex wrap to this flex box, now you will notice that the set width that we have set should now be shown, because once it gets to the end, the divs will now go under each other so as to accommodate the width that we've set. So if we reduce this width to something like 200 pixels, the wrapping will also adjust to that width. So just like that. So there are many things you can do using the flexbox, but so as not to make this video too long, these are just the basic things that I will show, and in later videos we will do much more powerful things using the flexbox. Now in the display property, we also have the inline values. So we've looked at the display inline. Let's also look at the inline block and inline flex. So now inline block just does the same thing as the block, as the display block, but if you notice, this time it doesn't span all the way to the end, which is 100% of its parents. It only spans to the width of its children, just like how the inline property works. And if you use inline flex, it does the same thing as a flex box, but only accommodates for the entire width of the contents inside it. So if we remove all this and just leave 1, 2, and 3, you'll see that the width of our container will be set to the width of all these children. So it only accommodates for these children, does not span all the way to the end. So just remember, the inline block and inline flex do the same thing as the block and flex property values, but they only do that accommodating for the width of their children. So that will be it for this video. We've looked at how we can use the display property to change the way elements on our page are displayed. So if you don't want an element to be displayed on your page at certain screen widths, you can use display none, or if you don't want an element to be displayed at all, use display none. And there are many things we can use display property to do, and we'll be looking at that in later videos. But for now, this will be the end, and in our next video we'll be looking at the position property. So see you in that video, and bye for now.